soul is unbreakable and insoluble, and can be neither burned nor dried. He is everlasting, all-pervading, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. Last text 25. Avyaktoyam achintyoyam avikaryoyam uchate tasmadevam viditvainam nanushochitam arhasi. Translation. It is said that the soul is invisible, inconceivable, immutable, and unchangeable. Knowing this, you should not grieve for the body. Back to text 15, page 91. O best among men, the person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for liberation. Purport by His Divine Grace. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Anyone who is steady in his determination for the advanced stage of spiritual realization and can equally tolerate the onslaughts of distress and happiness is certainly a person eligible for liberation. In the Varnashram institution, the fourth stage of life, namely the renounced order, sannyas, is a painstaking situation. Wife and children. But if anyone is able to tolerate such difficulties, surely his path to spiritual realization is complete. Similarly, in Arjuna's discharge of duties as a Kshatriya, he is advised to persevere, even if it is difficult to fight with his family members or similarly beloved persons. Lord Chaitanya took sannyas at the age of 24, and his dependents, young wife as well as old mother, had no one else to look after them. Yet for a higher cause, he took sannyas and was steady in the discharge of higher duties. That is the way of achieving liberation from material bondage. So I spoke on this verse a few Sundays ago, so read the next verse. Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent there is no endurance, and of the existent there is no cessation. This seers have concluded by studying the nature of both. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. There is no endurance of the changing body, that the body is changing every moment by the actions and reactions of the different cells is admitted by modern medical science, and thus growth and old age are taking place in the body. But the spirit soul exists permanently, remaining the same despite all changes of the body and the mind. That is the difference between matter and spirit. By nature, the body is ever changing and the soul is eternal. This conclusion is established by all classes of seers of the truth, but impersonalists and both impersonalists and personalists. In the Vishnu Purana, it is stated that Vishnu and his abodes all have self-illuminated spiritual existence. Jyotishmi Vishnur Bhavani Vishnu. The words existent and non-existent refer only to spirit and matter. That is the version of all seers of truth. This is the beginning of the instruction by the Lord to the living entities who are bewildered by the influence of ignorance. Removal of ignorance involves the reestablishment of the eternal relationship between the worshiper and the worshipable, and the consequent understanding of the difference between the part and parcel living entities and the Supreme Personality Godhead. One can understand the nature of the Supreme by thorough study of oneself, the difference between oneself and the Supreme Being. The difference between oneself and the Supreme Being understood as the relationship between the part and the whole. In the Vedanta Sutras, as well as in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Supreme has been accepted as the origin of all emanations. Such emanations are experienced by superior and inferior natural sequences. The living entities belong to the superior nature as it will be revealed in the 7th chapter. Although there is no difference between the energy and the energetic is accepted as a supreme, and energy or nature is accepted as a subordinate. The living entities, therefore, are always subordinate to the Supreme Lord, as in the case of the master and the servant. or the teacher and the taught. Such clear knowledge is impossible to understand under the spell of ignorance. And to drive away such ignorance, the Lord teaches the Bhagavad Gita for the enlightenment of all living entities for all time. So, yes, Krishna is beginning to explain the soul. And we hear in these subsequent verses that we read, explaining various characteristics of the soul. And here this point is made as a very general point that there is no endurance of the temporary material body, which is obvious as we move through the stages of the body, the six stages. You go from birth and ultimately to death. But what is consistent throughout this process, and this is what the seers of the truth actually understand, and even the impersonalists also see, as Prabhupada mentioned, the impersonalists and the personalists, they both have understanding that we're not the temporary body, but we're the soul, the transcendental living being then. But the difference is that the impersonalist does not see that the soul is just part and parcel of the whole and never will become one with the whole, in the sense of as quantitatively as good as the whole. But the personalist understands that we're part and parcel of the whole. We'll never be the whole, but we can be linked up with the whole, just like the hand and the body. The hand and the whole body. It's a whole mechanism, the body, and the part is the hand. So when the soul or the living entity functions as a hand, so to speak, then it becomes empowered to do miraculous things. One can do so many miraculous things with one hand, unlimited activities. Just like that. So when we become connected with Krishna in yoga, we can do unlimited things because Krishna can empower us to do anything. So that is the wonderful thing about being a personalist. And another wonderful thing is that you get to continue your eternal existence, your individual existence as a person. You can experience the wonderful mellows of the various mellows of devotional service with Krishna and get to relate with Krishna and all of his other devotees in a loving personal relationship. Whereas the impersonalist can just radiate him, herself, and the Brahma Jyoti. Ultimately will come back down to the material world. So obviously the devotees of the Lord, they see that like Rupa Goswami explains, that the happiness derived from Brahmananda, this impersonal realization, is just like the water containing the calf's hoof print compared to the ocean of devotional service in bhakti or as a personalist. So it is, you can just imagine how small of enjoyment that is compared to the ocean. So Krishna is giving knowledge which can't really get anywhere else. Like it's never been this clear for me reading other scriptures or philosophies about the soul. Krishna is just giving very clear, concise understanding of the soul. It's not going to be perishable. It can't be destroyed by water, earth, wind, etc., by weapons. It's indestructible, immeasurable, can't be slain. It's eternal. There's never a birth nor death. It's ever existing, etc. Just very clear, concise understanding of the soul, where it almost seems obvious, right? If you're if something is spiritual, then it's obviously beyond these material influences. But as Krishna really just lays it out, then it's very clear for us. There's no room to speculate about the nature of the soul. It's all here. So, of course, these are just general characteristics, and then the other question is, well, what does the soul do? And that is what the whole Bhagavad Gita is about. The conclusion of it is to be an instrument for Krishna. So, are there any comments or questions? Yes, Guru Maharaj.
The personality of the soul is also individual personality is described in the 12th verse of this chapter, that Krishna says, neither you nor me nor all these kings, we've all lived eternally. We're always the same person. We're distinct now, and we'll go on being distinct in the future. And so the idea that Krishna is describing souls as being impersonal cannot be established on that basis, because he makes a point, because he's different than Arjuna and all the kings, and they'll remain individual. So it's really a poor fund of knowledge if one accepts the aspect of being a soul, being Brahman, but doesn't accept the personality aspect, or God can't be a person. There's no logical reason why. They kind of put forth some idea that it would be limiting to God to have a form, to have a body. It's true, it might be limiting to have a form like our body, but Krishna doesn't have a form like our body. God doesn't have, and not only that, but the souls in the spiritual world also don't have bodies like our bodies. They're eternal bodies, made of Satchidananda Vigraha. That's what Lord Brahma makes as his foundational principle, that he's the Sarvakarana Karanam, the cause of all causes, and his form is eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. He's the supreme controller of all controllers. Ishvara Parama Krishna. So
Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? Yes. Magadari Prabhu.
I've always been confused about this wording, existent, because sometimes we say the Mayavadis, they say everything is false. And we say, no, it's real, but it's temporary. The material world is real, but it's temporary. But here we're hearing the word non-existent. So for me, it feels like we're saying it's not real. So I guess I'm confused. But
Asat. So the Sanskrit is asat. And this also translated many times as temporary, right? Asat, sat, eternal. Asat, sat, eternal. Asat, temporary. So it's just another synonym for this temporary existence. And I mean, in the absolute sense, one sees it as just so trivial, because it's so temporary. So when you think about the absolute time, right? Think about eternal time. And then you think about how things exist, what time interval things exist compared to that eternal time. It's an infinity to the infinity degree, so small, minuscule. So from the perspective of eternal time, it almost has like no existence. Yeah, it's so insignificant. So that's my understanding. Yes.
I was hearing a little lecture, and His Holiness Radhanath Swami said we can learn a lot about, we can learn a lot from nature. So, and I was wondering if, yeah, it says that Prabhupada says here, one can understand the nature of the Supreme through study of oneself. So, but if I just study myself or I study nature, isn't there a chance for me to get misled somehow or other? Misunderstand something?
Yes, that's also possible. I mean, what's being explained here about understanding one's nature is understanding one's eternal nature, one's nature as a soul, right? So understanding that the quality is the same with Krishna. And so when you peel back all the layers of conditioning, material contamination, then you get to that, which is our eternal existence. So that's essentially what you're supposed to understand by understanding when you understand yourself, you understand that you're eternal being, you're part of the whole. Of course, yeah, one could get misled thinking, okay, well, I like this, I like that. I have these desires, that desires. Then you become possibly some people become sahajis because they think that, I am also Krishna, or they think they can enjoy like Krishna, etc. And they think that that's all spiritual. But when one's on the purely understands the self, then yes, they understand that they are part and parcel of Krishna, and qualitatively the same as a spiritual being, but of course not quantitatively. So I missed some train of thought within that, but yes, Jaikesh Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. What's the difference between a sahaja and an impersonalist?
And a sahaja and an impersonalist, well, an impersonalist believes that they are soul, and they don't really see Krishna as, any significance in the terms of hierarchy of the absolute truth. So they think that all forms of, well, I mean, they think of everything as being Maya. So even Krishna's body, was of the illusory energy. And they think that Krishna was not the supreme being. And then they'll merge into the supreme being. So as far as I understand, the sahajas, they worship Krishna. They have some belief in, some belief in some personal aspect, but of course, an impersonalist seemingly can also be a sahaja. I don't know. I don't exactly remember reading specifically, what they truly believe as far as like as an impersonalist or personalist. Does anybody know?
Yeah. They may be impersonalists. Ultimately, in one sense, they are, because one who thinks that there are many gods, or I can be God, or I can enjoy on that platform, I can become Radharani, or I can become Krishna, or imitate his activities. Yes, sometimes it can be. They can also be impersonal, and they can, whatever they understand, it's not, it's got flaws. So just like if someone says, Mr. Such and Such is the president, and we're all the president. So that's, you couldn't say he's really a true personalist who accepts such and such as the president, because if he thinks everyone's the president, then he's an impersonalist also.
Yes, Krishna Shobha.
And Bhaktivinoda Thakur also identifies the Sahajiyas as one of the something like 13 Apasampradayas. They believe that they're followers of Shishika Gaurnatai, but they don't follow strictly in the path of the 6 Goswamis who renounce sense gratification. Although they chant Hare Krishna, they chant the holy names of Gaurnatai still, they're attached to women and money and intoxication. So their progress is slow. They're on the path of bhakti, but they're neophytes.
Anything else?
Another common quality of a sahaja is, somebody who jumps directly to the 10th canto without reading and making his way up to the head of the Lord. He just, you have to start at the feet and gradually make your way up to the head. It's not that you can just jump right into the Lord's intimate pastimes with the gopis and Radharani and the cowherd boys.
Okay. Text number 17. Know that which pervades the entire body is indestructible. No one is able to destroy the imperishable soul. Purport. This verse more clearly explains the real nature of the soul, which is spread all over the body. Anyone can understand what is spread all over the body. It is consciousness. Everyone is conscious of the pains and pleasures of the body in part or as a whole. This spreading of consciousness is limited within one's own body. The pains and pleasures of one body are unknown to another. Therefore, each and every body is the embodiment of an individual soul, and the symptom of the soul's presence is perceived as individual consciousness. This soul is described as 1/10,000th part of the upper portion of the hair point in size. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad confirms this. Balagrashata bhagasya shatadha kalpitasya cha bhago jiva savigyeya sachanantyaya kalpate. When the upper point of a hair is divided into 100 parts, and again each of such parts is further divided into 100 parts, each such part is the measurement of the dimension of the spirit soul. 5.9. Similarly, in the Bhagavatam, the same version is stated, Kesha gra shata bhagasya shatamsha sadrishatmakaha jiva sukshma sarupoyam sankyatito hi chit kanaha. There are innumerable particles of spiritual atoms, which are measured as 1/10,000th of the upper portion of the hair. Would someone else like to read 2 paragraphs? Okay, look at Ari.
For the individual particle of spirit soul is a spiritual atom smaller than the material atoms, and such atoms are innumerable. This very small spiritual spark is the basic principle of the material body, and the influence of such a spiritual spark is spread all over the body as the influence of the active principle of some medicine spreads throughout the body. Did I read that? This current of the spirit soul is felt all over the body as consciousness, and that is the proof of the presence of the soul. Any layman can understand that the material body minus consciousness is a dead body, and this consciousness cannot be revived in the body by any means of material administration. Therefore, consciousness is not due to any amount of material combination, but to the spirit soul. In the Mundaka Upanishad, the measurement of the atomic soul is further explained. Esho nuratma chetasa viditvayo yasmin prana panchadha samivesha pranayishchitam sarvam atpotam pragya pranam yasmin vishudhe vibhavatyeshatma. Quote, the spirit soul, or the soul, is atomic in size and can be perceived by perfect intelligence. This atomic soul is floating in the 5 kinds of air: prana, apana, vyana, samana, and udana. Is situated within the heart and spreads its influence all over the body of the embodied living entities. When the soul is purified from the contamination of the 5 kinds of material air, its spiritual influence is exhibited. Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.9.
The Hatha Yoga system is meant for controlling the 5 kinds of air, encircling the pure soul by different kinds of sitting postures, not for any material profit, but for liberation of the minute soul from the entanglement of the material atmosphere. So the constitution of the atomic soul is admitted in all Vedic literatures, and it is also actually felt in the practical experience of any sane man. Only the insane man can think of this atomic soul as all-pervading Vishnu Tattva. Can someone else read 2 paragraphs? Dr. Geo.
The influence of the atomic soul can be spread all over a particular body. According to the Mundaka Upanishad, this atomic soul is situated in the heart of every living entity. And because the measurement of the atomic soul is beyond the power of appreciation of the material scientists, some of them assert foolishly that there is no soul. The individual atomic soul is definitely there in the heart, along with the supersoul, and thus all the energies of bodily movement are emanating from this part of the body. The corpuscles, which carry the oxygen from the lungs, gather energy from the soul. When the soul passes away from this position, activity of the blood, generating fusion ceases. Medical science accepts the importance of the red corpuscles, but it cannot ascertain the source of the energy of that the source of the energy is the soul. Medical science, however, does not admit that the heart is the seat of all energies of the body. Does admit that the heart is the seat of all energies of the body. Such atomic particles of the spirit whole are compared to the sunshine molecules. In the sunshine, there are innumerable radiant molecules. Similarly, the fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord are atomic sparks of the rays of the Supreme Lord, called by the name Prabha, or superior energy. Neither Vedic knowledge nor modern science denies the existence of the spirit soul in the body, and the science of the soul is explicitly described in the Bhagavad Gita by the personality of Godhead himself.
Nice. Text 18, only the material body of the indestructible, immeasurable, and eternal living entity is subject to destruction. Therefore, fight, O descendant of heart. Purport. Will someone read the purport? Yes. Juan.
The material body is perishable by nature. It may perish immediately, or it may do so after 100 years. It is a question of time only. There is no chance of maintaining it indefinitely. But the spirit soul is so minute that it cannot even be seen by an enemy, to say nothing of being killed. As mentioned in the previous verse, it is so small that no one can have any idea of how to measure its dimension. So from both viewpoints, there's no cause of lamentation because the living entity can neither be killed as he is, nor can the material body, which cannot be saved for any length of time, be permanently protected. The minute particle of the whole spirit acquires this material body according to his work, and therefore observance of religious principles should be utilized. In the Vedanta Sutras, the living entity is qualified as light because he is part and parcel of all of the supreme light. As sunlight maintains the entire universe, so the light of the soul maintains this material body. As soon as the spirit soul is out of this material body, the body begins to decompose. Therefore, it is the spirit soul which maintains this body. The body itself is unimportant. Arjuna was advised to fight and sacrifice the material body for the cause of religion.
Yes, Bhaktivedanta.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I'm just wondering, please accept my humble obeisances. We hear about how the soul can't be cut into pieces and it can't be moistened by water, burned by fire. And we also hear how it can be covered over by material contamination. I'm just wondering if you could talk about that. Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, Krishna says to Arjuna that the soul cannot be cut by anything, can be moistened by water, it can't be burned by fire, but it can also be contaminated by matter at the same time. Like we read in the purport, you know, it's contaminated by the 5 life airs. Also, material contamination covering over the,
Yeah.
So can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, we have the soul, which is from the desire to enjoy the material world, gets embodied, or it gets encased in a body, which is the subtle body and the gross body, right? False ego, intelligence, mind, etc. The subtle body, and then you have the gross body, made of the elements, 4 elements. So, so the soul is pure. It's always eternally pure. It's just because it gets fit into that, in prison, you could say, into the subtle body and the material body. Now it's experiencing its consciousness filtered through this experience. It's like, right, the analogy is like going, if you're in a movie, if you're watching a movie, you're in a theater and it's very immersive, and you're becoming so caught up in the emotions of the characters, and you become so attached to it. It's like it feels so real. And then another example is like a dream. So you could say the dreamer, the person is lying there in the bed, and then they're dreaming. And in those dreams, you experience so many things. It's so real. You feel like you are the person in the dream. But you yourself are not actually being being harmed by tigers chasing you or bad things that happen in the dream. You know, so it's like that. So the soul is still pure, it's uncontaminated, it can't be hurt at all. But because it's attached to, it's become imprisoned in the material body, the subtle and gross, then it experiences it's attached to that experience, and now you're just, you know, now you have material contamination that accumulates in the subtle body, and then you have, you know, all these reactions encased in your gross and subtle form. But the soul is aloof from those things, but you know, it's experiencing that filtered through those forms you've developed. So, yes.
Yeah, the soul doesn't mix, like water and oil don't mix. So the soul never becomes actually contaminated in that sense. Another example is given that when a person is, let's say, on the ground and he doesn't see the sun in the sky, although the sun is in the sky, because he's covered by so many layers of clouds, he cannot see the sun in its proper way. But actually, he's not covered. He's just, there's something blocking. So that blocking is Maya, the illusion that one thinks that there's something other than Krishna. So in that mistaken condition, he's covered by the influence of Maya.
Any other comments or questions? Yes, Makadari, Prabhu.
So on this point about Maya covering, what's the difference between Maya and matter? And I have two verses in mind. In the 7th chapter, Krishna states that there's an inferior energy. And then also in the 7th chapter, he states that there's some divine energy of his, which is very difficult to overcome for the embodied living being. So I'm just wondering if there's like a difference between just matter and this illusion. Is it special category or?
Does anybody have any thoughts? Rishi?
Isn't matter like what makes up the material world, like atoms and the other things that we hear about in the creation of the universe in the Bhagavatam, like that that one thing that's like the amalgamation of all the matter? Is it the Mahatattva or something? So isn't that stuff matter? And then Maya is, like Magadari just said, it's an illusion that covers the living entity. So that's something different. I mean, ultimately it's a person who's causing those things, Durga, but she's an illusory potency covering the living being.
Makes sense to me.
Thank you very much for that. So I've always wondered if this personality who's the personification of Maya or Durga, if this person is a pure devotee, if this person is ever subject to illusion, or is this person a Nityasiddha person?
We hear she is a pure devotee. She has a thankless task, like we hear that she doesn't want to. I mean, she wants everybody to become a devotee of Krishna, but her job is to test the living entities. So, as far as I understand, she is a pure devotee of the Lord. Yeah, I think there's some more tattva you can go into with it, but I don't recall. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo. Hmm?